Welcome back to Behind the Biology, brought to you by ATCC. I'm your host, Dave Yarmosh. This is the second episode in the series where we're speaking to Professor Jamie Crill of Syracuse University about his experience in the field of forensic microbiology. If you haven't listened to the first episode, I definitely recommend it, as today we're going to discuss the type of experience Professor Crill had that gained him a professorship at New York's Syracuse University. Welcome back, Professor Crill. Always good to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us again. So last time we spoke, you are a professor at Syracuse University working and researching and educating in microbial forensics, which is increasingly fascinating. But naturally, I want to understand how you became a professor. I've briefly known you prior to this, and I know you weren't always a professor. Academia wasn't always your career path. So where did it start?
Oh, wow. This is so the tangled webs we weave, right? So before I decided to go to college, I was working at a local acute care psychiatric facility, right? So I worked tons and tons of hours working with patients that were sick, and eventually what happened is the program and the hospital closed down. So I had some decisions to make. Do I continue on working in acute care psychiatry, or do I go back to school? And I decided to go back to school because I thought all these hours and all this, it was burnout. You know, you get kind of burnt out. And I know a lot of people can agree with me that are working in healthcare settings now. But that's what I ended up doing. And I ended up taking some biology and chemistry courses and getting really interested in biochemistry. So I really wanted to take advantage of some of the opportunities that were available at the time, volunteering in someone's lab, start out washing dishes and stuff like that. So that's exactly what I did. Was I volunteered to wash dishes, and then it turned into, casting gels, which, this was before they were sold as precast, right? And just moved my way into some research projects. My first research project was looking at aptamers that bound specifically to ricin toxin proteins. So that research really kind of took off in the lab that I was in, and the PI for that lab, Dr. Phil Borer, was able to spin out a company that started. So right out of graduating from college, I was working for the company that we kind of built from the ground up based on this research, this aptamer development research that we were working on.
So, excuse me for a second. Not only were you an undergraduate researcher that got into the lab and immediately started working on the ricin toxin, one of the most poisonous things on the planet, or toxic things on the planet, that spun out a company that you immediately had a place in. That's incredible, really.
Yeah, it was just a blessing. And at the time, I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do.
Right. Who you want to be.
My students come in that are, master students or any kind of student, really, and I ask them, what is it that you want to do? What kind of dream do you want to fulfill? And I'm always relieved when they say I don't know, because I absolutely had no idea. So I just continued to work really hard. I liked what I was doing. After some time, I ended up receiving a job offer from a company called SRC here in Syracuse. And what they had was a position in their think tank. And they liked the idea of bringing some of this aptamer development over to their think tank. And what the think tank really was government agencies could come in and really kind of spell out some issues that they might have. Okay, we need a reliable way to detect ricin. What's a good way to do that? How would you approach this problem? It was an absolute dream come true. this position was perfect for me. I was, dead set on retiring from SRC. But at the time, sequestration happened. A lot of government resources were reallocated and so on. So the entire think tank was really kind of laid off. So I was back at the beginning again. Okay, what is it that I really want to do? Mm-hmm. So I blanketed the Northeast with my CV. Right, this is what I can do. Please hire me. Newly married, just had our first baby, kind of in a panic situation, and I got picked up by another government contractor in Charlottesville, Virginia, and my interview was very interesting to say the least. They said, okay, you worked with aptamers. We really don't want you to work with aptamers anymore, but because of that experience, you have all this experience with high throughput sequencing, some of the beginning bioinformatics type work, protein binding, things that we're interested in. We can't tell you exactly what the project is until you're on it. Does that sound interesting to you? Do you like to travel? Do you like to go camping? Things like that. So, and it sounded really too good to be true. So I moved my family to Charlottesville, and really one of the things that this company really wanted done was the setup of mobile laboratories that were able to be used as microbial forensics laboratories, right? So imagine all the things that you would need to put in a very small place that can be moved from location to location. And that just included all the instruments that I was working with anyway, all the analysis that I was doing anyway. It was just a transition from looking at toxins to, continuing to look at toxins, but not using aptamers.
Is that where the camping comes in with this deployable mobile laboratory?
Deployable mobile laboratories. Yep. If you like the outdoors and you like field research, that's definitely for you.
I am really impressed that you transitioned from this think tank where you could dream up a problem and then a solution to it, to kind of walking in blind to there's this project, we can't tell you about it, but you're going to do X, Y, and Z. It might be in the middle of the woods. And you think to yourself, this is great.
Yeah, no, I did my due diligence, at least on the company and the people that were interviewing me, right? Because it just sounded too good to be true. And honestly, it was the adventure of a lifetime, right? So about 10 years I spent working on this project and others like it, and was just have been able to kind of see the world and bring my science with me.
From both of those, which sound actually to me quite different from one another in terms of experiences gained and knowledge picked up, and almost fundamentally how they work and operate on a day-to-day basis. When did the idea of becoming a professor come into play? Like where did that start to form? And if you could even pin it down, why?
Yeah, well, there were a lot of reasons to come back to Syracuse, New York, right? A lot of family reasons, which really got me thinking about, well, how many of these trips do I have left in me? How many deployments do I have left in me? How long can I keep doing this before I need to kind of start thinking about what my next steps are? And then a position opened at Syracuse University, my alma mater, and they said, geez, we're looking for someone with forensics experience. And, it just really fell in line. I had never taught before. I've trained plenty of incoming young scientists into industry. I've trained a lot of government personnel on the science and research and why we do what we do, but never in such a structured setting. So
It's interesting how different the formality of academia is from, just a different formality of an industry. You're learning a skill to do a thing, to run a process, versus you're learning education to adapt however you choose to and to build on yourself, right? There is like kind of a fuzzy yet still clear separation of the two.
Yeah. It was the transition, I feel, is still ongoing, right? The questions get much bigger. And I talk to a lot of my colleagues around here, and I find myself constantly having to step back and say, okay, am I still on the right track as far as an academic? I think about some of the other differences, and I think the main one in particular is not working for industry or government. I get to publish now. So that's something that, I'm working on currently. Actually, the last couple of years of research, we've built up quite a bit of data, and I think we're at a point where we're starting to submit some papers and get things out there. So that's an absolutely new experience for me as well. Before it was all the research that you did, you just couldn't talk about it. You just got to experience it. Right?
Yeah, I'd have to expect, if your job interview can't tell you about your job, that you can't tell too many other people either, and certainly nothing as public as a journal publication. But that is really exciting. They say that scientific publications are kind of a currency, right? To an extent, you as a scientist are judged by the journal your paper's in, your position in the authorship list, and how many of these have come out on however variety of a topic. So to finally be able to get there must feel good. I know it took me quite a while, and it does feel excellent.
Yeah, it's kind of a relief to see something that you've written in some work that you've done, and have reviewers put their stamp on it, and stamp of approval of yes, this has been reviewed, this is appropriate, you did the right things, and we'll put this out there for the world to see.
Yeah, other experts saying there's no reason for imposter syndrome. You've done it all that you were supposed to. We all agree, and this is a contribution to the world.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. It is very satisfying. So now that you are a professor, and you are sort of striking this balance between the different types of education or different types of training, how much, obviously the knowledge and the experience from your previous roles inform what you're doing now, but on a day-to-day basis, working with students or working in the lab, what kind of information are you pulling from this career in GovCon or industry?
Well, I quickly was educated on SOP, standard operating procedures, have no place really in academia. They're called protocols, right? They're the same thing. So there's a language. The other thing is, and I think everyone takes it seriously, but I might take it a little bit to the next level, which is safety precautions, and what we work with, and protecting yourself and your samples, especially in forensics. We talked about in the last episode that the answers have real consequences, so contamination can be a real issue. So beyond just protecting yourself, but protecting your samples and things like that is something that I really, really harp on with my students. And I think they have an appreciation for it by the time they leave, for sure.
Would you attribute that to the mobile lab deployment? If your research is currently, at least in part, focused on the attribution of an organism to, say, a geographic location, and previously you were bringing a lab from one place to another, it seems to me that it'd be ripe for contamination, because unlike in a standing laboratory setting where everything has a degree of control save for the people that come in and out. The entire lab is moving and bringing everything with it, its entire microbiome with it.
Yeah, yeah. And whether you're working out of the back of a van or out of a tent, there's a real concern. You have to think about everything that you're doing from the moment you open the door to that lab space to when you're, decontaminating your pipetters at the end of the day. So, yeah, definitely a high level of focus needs to be put on maintaining safety.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that you keep, or you've said safety a couple times while talking about contamination. It's almost less like you're referring to the safety of the biologists themselves as to the safety of the work.
Yeah, well, I think the safety to the biologists is definitely implied and obviously the number one, right?
Of course.
But the safety, the security of your sample, it can't really be understated here. If you're receiving samples that need to be analyzed from an area that people had to go into harm's way to collect, you don't want to send them back out there the next day because you had a contamination event in your laboratory.
One that could be avoided.
Right.
So having taken this path that you have through industry, GovCon, academia, it sounds as though you are very personally content with your career. But I imagine this is not what you anticipated when you first got to college. You said you didn't know what you were going to do with your life, but probably wouldn't have guessed the way it's gone. Is there a lesson in there that you try to impart to your current students or incoming students?
Absolutely. I would say about 90% of the students that I meet with don't really have a clear vision of what outside of academia will look like for them. And I can relate. I look back on kind of this windy road that I've taken to get to where I am now, and who knows where it's going to go in the future. And I tell my students, just continue to work hard. If you love what you do and you work hard at it, there will always be opportunities for you. And people aren't going to neglect the fact that, or ignore the fact that that you're working hard and you're passionate about what you do. When I bring students in, one of the things I try to gauge, which is nearly impossible, but something I still look for, is enthusiasm. Right? Mm-hmm. How enthusiastic are you to come in and work on some of these projects? If I get a sense of enthusiasm and my laboratory's full, I will probably make room somewhere, somehow, to take that enthusiastic student and put them on a project.
Right. Skills can be learned, experience can be gained, progress can be made, but none of that really happens without the interest, the dedication, the enthusiasm.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, I think that's going to wrap us for this episode. I am excited, based on everything you've said about both your laboratory and your research, to see any of these papers that are coming out. So when that time comes, please ping me. If they're going to be on bioRxiv, let me know that too.
Absolutely. Might have to involve you in a couple.
Well, I'm open to that as well. In the meantime, I will see you again shortly to work on episode 3, where we talk about the future of the kind of research you're doing, the future of your career, and anything else that comes to mind.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Professor. From acute care psychiatric work back to undergraduate school for biochemistry, and starting over in a new career path to working at a brand new company with one of the most toxic substances that exists, to leveraging that experience for a dream job that dried up, starting over again, to moving a few hundred miles for a job that legally can't explain his goals, leading to Jamie traveling the world for over a decade and ultimately returning to Syracuse as a professor. Whew. Jamie Crill has had multiple careers in a small window across a slew of different aims. This has certainly impacted his education strategy in a unique way. Next week, we'll close out our series with Professor Crill by talking about the next several years of his research, expectations with his current role, and what developments microbial forensics may be anticipating.